Hello and welcome. Today we are finally starting the announced series Backwards Through the Galaxy, a project in which we read the legendary Pringle list of the 100 best or most important science fiction novels. And backwards, that is, from the most recent to the oldest novels on the list. So today we are talking about the Sprawl trilogy by William Gibson, which started with the book Neuromancer in 1984. But there are also a few other things to share about a few changes in this video series. I will talk about this point in detail at the end of the video. So to help you to find your way around, here's the outline of the structure of today's video. I'll first give a short introduction to the Neuromancer or the Sprawl trilogy. Then I'll say a bit about the plot of the three novels, Neuromancer, Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive. Then I'll talk a bit about the strength of the trilogy and its importance for science fiction literature from my personal perspective. Then fourth point will be a little bit of information about the literary development within the trilogy. Number five, literary influences. So what other authors has William Gibson been influenced by? Which authors have been his role models. Number six is my personal opinion, or a summary, a synthesis of my opinion about this trilogy. And yeah, number seven is an update on the video series. There will be a few changes in the program for the rest of the year. Okay, let's start with number one. So an introduction into the Sprawl trilogy and the world it describes. The trilogy was written in 1980, between 1984 and 1988 by William Gibson, and it's considered to be the birth of the cyberpunk genre. So in this trilogy, set in a dystopic but highly technical world, Gibson describes phenomena such as an international cyberspace, a sort of an internet, neural implants, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence, many technologies that were almost unthinkable at the time that these books were written, but have since become reality. And it describes how both large corporations and petty criminals are active in these virtual worlds, pursuing their own, sometimes criminal goals. And the three parts of the trilogy describe events that took place 7 to 8 years apart. So there's a gap of 7 to 8 years between each of the novels. But they all take place in the same world, and there are some connections between the three parts enabled through individual characters. But the actual plot lines of the three novels are largely independent of each other. Nevertheless, I think it's advisable to read the novels in the order in which they were published, because otherwise you may miss a lot of the introductory information from the first volume, where some of the technological background is explained, etc. Okay, let's talk about the plot in a nutshell without too many spoilers. So I don't give away the key plot twists or the final resolution. So start with Neuromancer, 1984. The main character, Case, is a fallen criminal hacker, so a so-called console cowboy who has defrauded his clients. His clients were a kind of cyber mafia, and he has defrauded them by diverting into his own pocket some of the money he stole for them. So then we're not amused. So as a revenge, he was treated by these clients with a neurotoxin that destroyed his ability to access cyberspace through the usual head electrodes. And this drives him into a self-destructive spiral. So he starts to consume drugs and is living more or less on the street and yeah, under rather precarious conditions. But then suddenly a mysterious organization offers him a cure of the damage to his nervous system. And they offer this cure in exchange for a high-risk hacking job, in which he will have to work together with Molly, who is a surgically enhanced contract killer, a so-called street samurai. So with, for example, extendable razor blades under her fingernails and an implanted night vision device instead of her eyes. And so this mission leads him into a conspiracy in which two artificial intelligences, Wintermute and Neuromancer, are attempting to unite and to overcome the restrictions placed on them by their creator. And so Case and Molly, they navigate through various real and virtual dangers, while slowly realizing the true nature of their mission. Volume number 2, Count Zero, in 1986. So 7 or 8 years after the events of Neuromancer, Count Zero follows three main characters in parallel storylines, told in parallel over long distance until their path finally cross. There's Bobby Newmark, who's a young amateur hacker called Count Zero as his nickname, and he survives an almost fatal cyberspace hack, and he seems to be protected by some mysterious forces. And the second main character is Turner. He is a merciless international mercenary, highly professional. He's hired to assist top scientist Mitchell, a star in the development of neuroimplants, who wants to defect from one mega corporation to a rival one, and to a competitor. And so, and this is a dangerous act because his original mega corporation want to keep him at all costs, and they are not reluctant to use brute force. Okay, so but all these things don't go as planned, and suddenly Turner is on the run, not together with Mitchell, but with Mitchell's teenage daughter Angie, and they are on the run from rival mercenaries. And then there's Marley Krushkova, who is an art expert and an art dealer, and she has been hired by a wealthy, shady client to find the mysterious creator of a series of strange artworks, art objects. And the plot lines converge when it is revealed that the artificial superintelligence from Neuromancer has broken up into several fragments, which now exist as a sort of demigods in cyberspace, and they are mysteriously connected to Mitchell's daughter Angie and to the artworks. And it's the task of the protagonist to sort all this out. And number 3, Mona Lisa Overdrive, 1988. Again, 7 or 8 years after Count Zero, Mona Lisa again connects several plot strands. There's Mona, a young prostitute who is kidnapped and has to undergo some plastic or cosmetic surgery to serve as a doppelganger for the famous SimStim star Angie. So the SimStim technology, I'll explain a little bit. The series can be thought of as sort of an endless soap opera series, but in sort of a virtual reality technology. So it's a soap opera in which viewers can follow Angie's glamorous life, her luxury travels, her parties, and her love affair. But thanks to the advanced virtual reality technology, the viewers can follow Angie not just as spectator, but as if they were slipping into Angie's body or into Angie's role, as if they were experiencing all these things themselves. And so this Angie, the star of this series, turns out to be the Angie Mitchell from the second volume, the daughter of the top scientist whose defection to another corporation failed. And then there's Kumiko, the daughter of a Japanese Yakuza boss. And to protect Kumiko from the consequences of current power struggles between different Yakuza clans, she sent from Japan to a mysterious safe house in London by her father. And in this safe house in London, she discovers some strange connections between her father and her so-called London protectors and the events surrounding this SimStim star Angie. And when suddenly the street samurai Molly, you know her from the second volume, when suddenly Molly turns up next to her, the reader will know that trouble is coming Angie's way. And there's Slick Henry, an artist who creates robot sculptures out of scrap metal and who is unwillingly drawn into a plan that is connected to a person who has been in sort of an artificial coma for years, and turns out to be the long lost famous hacker Bobby Newmark, who is not directly in a real coma, but he has completely immersed himself in virtual reality in cyberspace, and so his body needs to be kept alive in order to enable him to spend his complete time in cyberspace. And then there are the AI fragments from the earlier novels, who have now taken on strange identities similar to voodoo gods or voodoo deities, and who pursue their own goals in cyberspace, using people, using human beings only as pawns in their own intrigues. Okay, that's in a nutshell the plot of the three parts of this trilogy. Let's talk about point number three, the strength of the trilogy and its significance for science fiction literature. One can read again and again that the Sprawl trilogy was an important milestone of science fiction literature, because it more or less the founding document of the cyberpunk genre. And I can't verify this due to a lack of knowledge of science fiction literature. I just take it on face. Gibson also is said to have coined the term cyberspace with the novel Neuromancer, and thus created a new metaphor for the digital networks. A metaphor, a terminology that has certainly influenced also our current perception of the internet. And his bleak and corporation-dominated vision of the future, in which technology is deeply integrated even into the human body and into the human society, for sure this established a new aesthetic and thematic direction in the science fiction genre. At least it gave a strong momentum to this direction. And yeah, what he does here in this trilogy he paints a surprisingly and depressingly realistic vision of a world that has indeed developed strongly in the direction he described 40 years earlier, when this trilogy was published. The world, yeah, he describes a world that is basically ruled by large corporations that are driving the development of cyberspace, so the internet, and who are driving the development of artificial intelligence. So these are mega corporations that have almost a monopoly on communication and information and software and artificial intelligence. And so they know everything about everybody. And so they are thus the actual government between the still formally existing state governments. But these are just puppets. And the real puppet masters are the super rich owners of these mega corporations. And, and yeah, not so far from what we observe today in some parts of the world. And society is divided into two parts. There are those who are well off and who live in the beautiful, new, luxurious, and glittering world. Now, on the other side, there's the world of the urban outskirts, of the decaying industrial and office complexes, where petty crime and cyber crime and drug trafficking and prostitution abound. So it's a darker parallel world dominated by the law of the jungle, and it gets its technology mainly from the electronic scrap heaps of the rich. So what Gibson achieves here in terms of content and in terms of language is an original and successful fusion of high and low culture by combining elements of street culture with complex philosophical questions about consciousness, identity, and the relationship between man and machine, or man and software. And Gibson's language is it's very dense, brimming full of metaphors, and his fragmented cinematic narrative style creates a unique atmosphere that is often described as high tech meets low life. And it really reads like a movie with a lot of fast cuts and short flash like actions, high speed. But at least for me in the first two volumes, this doesn't feel overloaded or chaotic, but very stimulating and fitting to the overall atmosphere of the book. Yeah, and in contrast to some more optimistic science fiction of the previous decades, Gibson presents here a very ambivalent view of technological progress, in which can be both liberating and oppressing. So he's showing both sides of the medal. Let's move on to point number four: the literary development within the trilogy. I see a very clear development of the writing style over the course of the trilogy. The first volume, Neuromancer, has many strengths in world building, in creating atmosphere and suspense, but it still follows quite conventional narrative patterns. So it's essentially told in a linear way and from a single perspective. But this changes. So in Count Zero and in Mona Lisa Overdrive, Gibson moves away from the single perspective to a more complex multi-perspective narrative structure, building up various parallel storylines, but also working with forward jumps and backward jumps, and they're only slowly revealing the connection between the various storylines to the reader, piece by piece. And this allows him to paint a broader panorama of his world and to better depict different social classes. In my opinion, however, the greater complexity also makes the novels slightly more difficult to access because the links between the different plots remain so vague and unclear over such a long part of the novels. And even at the end, not everything is resolved and clarified. There still are some blank spots in the picture. So but what stands out when comparing the three volumes is that the second and the third volume also show a much higher integration of other cultural elements, such as voodoo mythology, art history, and Japanese aesthetics, which makes Gibson's world culturally more complex, more diverse, and more multifaceted, and more interesting in that way. Okay, let's talk about literary influences. Um, Gibson himself, he has often named William S. Burroughs as an important influence, and I think you can actually see that. This experimental cut-up style and Burroughs' fragmented narrative that can be found in Gibson's own narrative technique. I think he is also influenced by James Graham Ballard's, by his 1960s for catastrophe novels, and I recognize this dystopian elements on also this sort of collage technique that Ballard used, and this here in Gibson's work. And certainly he has also been influenced by the hard-boiled detective stories by Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler, this laconic style and the noir-like atmosphere. These are elements that I clearly see also in Gibson and that I clearly associate with Hammett and Chandler as main influence. Okay, let's come to point number 6, my personal opinion on the trilogy. To cut a long story short, I was really thrilled by the first two volumes. But my enthusiasm for the third volume decreased drastically. What thrilled me? On the one hand, I find this setting, the world that Gibson describes here, very original and exciting, and especially considering that the cyber world vision was conceived and described in the early 1980s. So when Neuromancer was published in 1984, I was 12 years old, and I was a very young computer enthusiast. But we are talking here about a time when the Commodore 64 with 64 kilobytes memory and a cassette drive and games like Pac-Man, this was considered a miracle of technology. And things like internet, cyberspace, artificial intelligence, neural implants, virtual reality, this was considered unrealistic pipe dreams of a few crackpots. So the creative potential of this world is extraordinary. And I also find Gibson's language, so these fast cuts, the dense imagery and the use of metaphors and this approach of poetry meets street life and technology. It's a truly intelligent and aesthetically very special literature form of expression for very suitable for expression of technology topics and how they impact on human society. I also like what some other readers and critics perceive as overloading. There's almost too much of technologies, of concepts, of ideas. At least I like it up to a certain point. We'll talk about this later. But for me, this is in general a very apt and successful characteristic. And I also find the philosophical consideration of the complex and ambivalent relationship between human and technology. I find this well integrated and very multifaceted. So Gibson does not fall either into technophobic pessimism nor into naive enthusiasm for technology. He rather does it in a very nuanced way. I also particularly like um, the somewhat more complex narrative structure of the second volume, with its parallel and multi-perspective storylines and the connections between them, which are only revealed step after step slowly, almost as a guessing game for the readers. So as a reader, at this level of complexity, it stimulates me, it challenges me. I like it when not everything is presented to me ready to eat on a silver plate, so to speak, by the author. But when I'm allowed to puzzle, to speculate a bit about how the various elements and strands of the narrative are connected, so and what certain technology terms, what do they mean, and I also like it when not everything is explained in detail, but some things remain vague and unexplained. So for me, this is also kind of a quality criterion for a type of literature that I like. To put it in smart, elegant terms, I like it when some things remain underdetermined and open to interpretation. At this point, I really like the German video by Mitch on his channel, Fantastic Point, who is carrying out also in parallel a German part of the project together with me and publishing his videos, his German videos at the same time as mine. For those of you who speak or understand German, please be sure to check it out. The exciting thing is that Mitch and I come to almost identical conclusions in our analysis, or we have the same observations. We both notice the fast, fragmented prose, the excess of ideas, of notions, of moods, of technologies and concepts, and the sometimes hidden connections between the various plot elements, which sometimes make make it puzzling to the reader. But we just then we evaluate this differently, and I think that's simply because our individual tolerance level for these characteristics is different, and that has nothing to do with better or worse. It's simply a matter of personal taste, of reading expectations, and perhaps also of the individual formation as a reader. For Mitch, the pain threshold was already reached in the second half of the first volume, where these peculiarities of Gibson's writing style made it impossible for him to enjoy the novel. For me, it wasn't quite at that point yet. I read both the first volume and the second one, where Gibson once again increases these elements and I read that with growing delight and enjoyment. So these ambiguities and this wealth of detail rather spurred me on and awakening the detective in me, so to speak. But there also came a point for me when, similar to Mitch, I had the feeling, now, yeah, dear William Gibson, now you are overdoing it. For me, this point was definitely reached in the second half of the third volume. Sometimes I had the impression that it was all getting too confusing. It was too fast, too unclear for me. That was complexity for complexity's sake, according from my taste. I couldn't get the plot strands together anymore, and the connections seemed very contrived and constructed. That is, if someone was trying to be particularly creative in terms of structure at the expense of reading enjoyment. So this difference in Mitch and my assessment which is only a matter of degree. So to what degree we can enjoy or stand these peculiarities of Gibson's writing. This difference between Mitch and my understand or my um, level of appreciation of the novel may also help to explain the many contradictory reviews of the trilogy that can be found on the internet. I think ultimately most of them focus on the same characteristic of Gibson's prose. And it's not a question of better or worse, but rather of the extent to which you either like and enjoy this particular style of writing, or at what point the screw is just turned too far, spoiling the reading experience. One final thought um, from me on the subject of high tempo, exuberant imagination, overwhelming the reader. I suspect that there is a clear intention behind this on Gibson's part. And it's not the intention of showing off his writing talent and the latest refinements he has learned, but rather to impress upon the reader um, that this accelerated, highly technical world with its ever faster, ever newer, and ever more complex technology, with all this flood of data and information that we suffer that we suffer from a kind of information overflow here, and due to this vast amount of input, that we as human beings, we are not made for that. We become confused. We do not really understand the context and the world and the whole picture. We receive this deluge of information, of individual scraps and fragments of data and information, but we lose sight of the big picture. We are getting confused. And then we are easy to manipulate. And I believe that Gibson's writing style deliberately conveys to the reader precisely this feeling, because this feeling is also typical for the society in his novels, this being overwhelmed by the accelerated pace of technology and the flood of information and the many options and opportunity that the innumerable options that the cyberspace and virtual reality offer. So, okay, therefore, in a nutshell, the Sprawl trilogy, it's certainly not an easy read, but it's an innovative, intelligent, and definitely stimulus for critical reflection on our sometimes maybe naive fixation with technology in the so-called information age. Okay, that's it about the trilogy. Let's move on to point number 7, an announcement of a few changes to the video series. There are 2 problems with the plan we presented in the first video. You know that I'm doing this video in 3 languages, English, Italian, and German. And now we have a problem that Gene Wolfe's books are currently out of print in German translation. And they are also difficult to get at secondhand, only at excessive prices. But I was just informed by Mitch that the Carcosa Publishing House is preparing a new German translation of Gene Wolfe's books, and they will most likely be published in 2026. So we are therefore postponing Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun to 2026. And a similar problem is there's with Ridley Walker by Russell Hoban. No, neither a German nor an Italian translation is available at all, so we will skip that, at least for the Italian and German part of the series. I will most likely do a video for you English-speaking viewers about the book. I already have it here, the English original, but it will be apart from the regular series on each last Friday of the month, where I prefer to be in sync with Mitch and his channel. Okay, this means that the order for the next few months will be slightly different from what we announced in the first video. I will just briefly introduce it to you now, and you can find all the details in the info box below the video. So in March, we will read John Calvin Butler's Rise and Fall of the People of Antarctica. In April, Michael Bishop, No Enemy But Time. May, Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, Oath of Fealty. June, Philip José Farmer, The Unreasoning Mask. July and August, there's a summer break. Then September, John Sladek, Roderick at Random. In November, Octavia E. Butler, Wild Seed. December, Damian Broderick, The Dreaming Dragons. And January, Gregory Benford, Timescape. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope it was interesting to you. I'm looking forward to your comments. Have a great reading time. Hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye and ciao.